everyone, this is Miss Krolak, and this presentation is going over the novel Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. And we're looking at this particular piece because it is very similar to that of Antigone because of the fact that it is a tragedy and illustrates the tragic hero. First off, the novel by Chinua Achebe, a little bit about him. He was born in Africa, and so within the area of Igbo, and he had experienced firsthand not only different and various tribal cultures, but also the language. And he's has won many different types of literary awards, but because of his use of language and not only the richness of the language and the richness of the African language, but also illustrating the local color of each of these tribes and their customs throughout their culture. The book itself does not take place in the 50s, but it was published in the late 50s, early 60s. And the actual novel takes place in the 1890s about, but it is one of the most widely read African novels because, again, being able to capture that particular type of local color of each of those tribes was something that at the time was not really seen a lot. And so people really liked to get that particular aspect, especially from somebody who had experienced it firsthand. And like I said before, it was shows this pre-colonial, which means that this was before the white man really came, and that there wasn't a lot of European influences of their culture brought on by the British, and so it's able to really capture that true African culture of their lives, their beliefs, and their values. And again, that's why this particular piece is so valued because of that. And in our novel, it shows the falling apart of their people and their culture, which again was brought on by the British, brought on by that European influence. And so again, the idea of things fall apart because of their culture falling apart, they were becoming more Western and more of that influence of the white man coming into their world. And so the novel itself is divided up into several different parts. And the first part, which we're going to take a big look at, is about Okonkwo, who is our main character, and the culture within the tribe, the Ibu culture. The second and third parts of the novel trace the advances and the effects that were brought on by the British and the European influences, those effects of the white man. And so that was another reason why the novel was so well read and so well liked, because of the different parts in which he kind of split up this novel, and showing that, again, it was the first part that took in that local color and really exhibited what the individuals were like, especially within their values, with their culture, with their language, which is something that we're going to take a look at as we read the novel. Some of the main ideas that we're going to try to focus in on, or like our themes, are things of tradition and fate, which we've talked about before with Antigone. We talked a lot about fate and how it was the fate of Antigone because of what was told by her father and his destiny. And so it was her fate, even though it was her choice to bury her brother, it was still fate that she was supposed to go through with that, and then she herself die. We've looked at tradition on how in Antigone and in other cultures throughout the year, what is important to each of them. But within Antigone, it was tradition, with their religious beliefs of gods and not wanting to anger the gods, and how you were supposed to have a traditional burial for individuals, otherwise the gods would be angry. You're going to see something very similar to that within this novel again. And another idea there is manliness, and that idea of kind of not necessarily being macho, but being that of pride and honor is something that is extremely important to those individuals that lead their households. And so again, that kind of sounds like King Creon too, with him wanting to be a strong leader and exhibit those types of qualities for his people. And some of the other things that you'll see a lot with these individuals, just like we did with an Antigone, is that they valued loyalty, they valued family, which is that kinship, and they valued customs, and they wanted those customs to be honored. And so you'll see again a struggle of those customs, because like with an Antigone, it was Antigone who felt that it was the gods that kind of outlined what those customs should be, and that man, meaning King Creon, really shouldn't have had any say in what went on with the burial of her brother. And so you're going to see how Okonkwo kind of views those, our main character, and how he wants to have those things exhibited, but also how he, because of his strong will, those types of things get in the way and eventually lead to his downfall. So Okonkwo, who is our main character of the novel, he eventually becomes the leader of the Umufio clan area, and he is a yam farmer, which I don't know about you, but I'm not a big fan of yams, but that was, something that was kind of like passed down. That was what they grew in that area. That was, again, very cultural. If we were writing this book or reading this book about somebody who lived here, our main character would probably be a corn farmer or a soy farmer. So the product itself, I know it may be silly to think this dude's a yam farmer, but again, it was cultural, and that is what grew in that area. Because you got to remember, with this being in Africa, they had hot and dry seasons and then very wet seasons. It wasn't anything that was one mixed well with the other, or how here, summer kind of goes into fall, takes forever, and then it goes into winter. It was either one or the other. And so you're going to see that in the novel, excuse me, as well. He is, just like I said before, with him wanting to be his values of being prideful and kind of that manliness, we learned that he is really ashamed of his father. And he strives himself to be completely different. He wants to be productive, not that of his lazy father. He wants to be brave and manly, unlike his father, who never really established much in his lifetime. And so that is something that continually drives our main character as well. And so because of that drive, he eventually has a lot of social greatness, a lot of social status within his tribe. And like it says up there before, becoming clan leader. And because of his hard work with his farm, he eventually achieves a lot of financial success. He is, again, with that social success, marries 3 women and fathers several children. And that, again, is very culturalistic, with men marrying many different women. And in a lot of cultures, it was usually the first wife who was higher within the women's society as well. And you'll see that kind of play out in some of the chapters, as well as, for example, they're waiting for one of the wives, the first one, to come and drink the palm oil wine first before the other wives can, and then they can't go on with their ceremony or can continue until she shows up and does so. So there's a hierarchy there, and even just with that brief storytelling, you're getting an insight to their culture. And with these several children that he has, obviously, with any parent, you're going to have some that you maybe like a little bit more than others, that you rely on a little bit more than others, and treat maybe differently than others. It's a good thing I only have one child, so I don't have to do that. He does not adapt well to change, and you see that very quickly in one of the early chapters, chapter 2 or chapter 3, where he is kind of going against one of the rules of their culture, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And it's very hard for someone to tell him what to do, especially once he's become very manly and become this leader. But because he struggles with that, just like we've talked before about that struggle of a tragic hero, his flaw is just that, his ability to adapt to change, and that ultimately helps to lead to his downfall. And he is considered a tragic hero because his flaw, not only not being able to adapt to change, but because he's so afraid of becoming like his father, this causes a lot of trouble for him. And trying to be, again, so brave and so manly and so productive and unlike his father, it pulls up or brings up those walls between his family and his tribe. And again, bringing on more trouble and sorrow for him rather than kind of bending and listening and doing what's best overall for others. Some of the other important characters, because there's a lot of characters here, and with these, I can understand with the African names, they can get a little confusing, but this could be something that you can refer back to. And just like with anything, once you hear the names after a while, you'll get a sense of who's who and whatnot. Onokwa, who is Okonkwa's father, he again was kind of shameful to Okonkwa. He never became a warrior. He was even, it said that he did not like the sight of blood. And so if he didn't like the sight of blood, there was no way he was going to become a warrior. He was really bad with money. He owed a lot of people. And you'll see that even in one early chapter, somebody is like, hey, you need to start paying up your debts. And he's like, well, I can't pay you. Excuse me, I have to pay the ones that I owe the most to, and then I'll work my way down. But he never really does, and he dies owing a lot of people money. And because of this, because of his disgrace, he does not get proper burial rites and is buried in what they call the evil forest. That sounds ominous. Nwai, who is Okonkwa's oldest son, he views him as kind of weak and lazy. And he reminds Okonkwa of his father. And so because of that, he takes out a lot of aggression on him. He is constantly berating him, constantly trying to push him even harder, and beats him often just because of that. So not a good father-son relationship there. Ikemefuna is a boy that is given to Okonkwa by a nearby village, and we'll learn a little bit more about that. It's not like they're like, hey, here, you want a kid? There is an incident that happens that we'll talk about in a minute, and for punishment, they're given this boy. But instead of it being a bad thing right off the bat, he becomes really popular within the family, within the roles of the other children. And he and Nuia become very close, and he becomes a role model to him. He even settles in very much with the family to where he begins to call Okonkwa father even. Ezinama is the only child of his second wife and Okonkwa's favorite because she has that confident, bold spirit that he has. And oftentimes he refers to the fact that he wishes that she was a boy so that she could be that son that he always had wanted. Ikemefuna, I know I say that wrong, is again that boy that was given to them by a nearby village. He is the closest thing that he can have to a son rather than his own. But Azima is one that he shares a lot of secrets and talks, and he confides in her a lot, and looks up to her and honors and cherishes her a lot. Don't want to talk too much about her because there's things that happen that got to build up that suspense, I guess. Ubirika is Okonkwa's loyal and close friend, which, for someone who is kind of hard-headed and stubborn and doesn't like to change, it's kind of unusual that he's got at least somebody, but everybody's got a close friend that they can kind of rely on. And then you'll see that there are a lot of other tribal members, and as we go on in the second part, you'll meet the Englishmen and the other missionaries that come to try to change these tribal individuals. So in chapter 1, just a summary, this is either before or after you read. I think it's a good idea to look at the notes several times, but here we meet Okonkwa right away, and we find out he is a warrior, and his village is a part of 9 other villages. And not only in Africa, but even in Native American tribes, you see this a lot where the tribes, or like if you want to think of the state, a lot of little cities belong to Indiana. That's kind of the same idea. There's a lot of little villages that kind of belonged together. So you have that individuality of each village, but they would come together and still work together. And you'll see that right away in one of the meetings that they hold right away. Okonkwo becomes really popular because he defeats Amalizin, who is known as, they call him the cat. He's not a real cat, but he beats him at wrestling. And the reason why they call him the cat is because, like in wrestling, when you have somebody flat on their back for several seconds, that's how you win. Well, the cat, they say that he is never able to put his back on the ground. And so that's how he kind of gets that nickname. Because if you've ever tried to put a cat flat on its back, now like dogs, Wrigley rolls over, shows me her belly all the time, and she lays on her back. But if you ever try to get a cat, try to put them on their back, it's really difficult. But that individual had been undefeated for 7 years. And so it was exciting that Okonkwo was the individual that finally was able to defeat him. And so he becomes a leader and becomes a warrior because of all of the people whom he has defeated. He learns more of, or we learn more of his disgraceful father, who at this point is now dead. But there's a lot of flashbacks to where we can learn more about him owing a lot of people and never becoming that warrior, and just that constant reminder of failure to Okonkwo. Onokwa his father was the opposite of what you would think like a warrior. So if we say that like he was an athlete, we've got his father who was more like into music and art and drama. So it would be like, if we're talking cliques, that's kind of like the opposite. Get that kind of idea. And so Okonkwo never really was. He never appreciated music. He never appreciated art. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, he dies with his flute, or is buried with his flute, because of that love of music and art. And that also shows a lot of cultural aspect as well, because there were those that music and art, it was important to them. Chapter 2, because chapter 1's really short. Chapter 2, this is where that big town meeting happens. And here we learn that one of the wives of a village member had been murdered while at that local market of a nearby village. And since he, meaning Okonkwo, was considered the best warrior because of his collection of heads, yes, severed heads, Okonkwo was chosen as the village spokesperson. Well, now, if you were in a village where this guy coming over being the best warrior because of his collection of heads, you'd be a little nervous and a little bit fearful of him. And the nearby village was open to listening to what it is that he had to say. So that Mbamwo tribe, he goes there and warns them, you either are going to give us what we want, or we're going to go to war with you. And remember, they don't want to go to war with this guy having his collection of, I forgot how many heads, but a lot of heads. They say you are to give us a virgin and a young boy. And they give that virgin to the man who lost his wife. And the young boy, who we've talked about already, Ikamofina, goes to live with, Okonkwo's one of his wives. He's very demanding of his family, and we see this. I've already talked about how he beats his lazy son, but he's demanding, and you can look at that in two different ways. One, that he is a tyrant, or you can look at it as someone who is able to keep as many households, meaning as many wives, in line, expects a lot of them, because that is one way how he's able to achieve that social and financial status that he does. We learn that he totally fears and dreads that weakness, the weakness of his father. And he associates weakness and fear, he associates it with his father, and he associates those qualities with a woman. And so anybody who, was called a woman or was called weak or fear, it's basically the same thing. And as a man, especially in that tribe, or any man, would not want to be called this at all. And so we really see that here in chapter 2. And that helps to really characterize Okonkwo for the rest of our novel. Chapter 3, you begin to hear the word chi. a lot, and I just wanted to mention that's kind of like a spirit of a man, and it was really important aspect within their culture. We have a lot of gods and spirits and those types of things, and just like within Antigone, you don't want to tick off or anger those gods or those spirits, because bad things can come to your household or can come to the whole village or the tribe, and so you're going to see a lot of that, which we're used to. So it sounds familiar, just a different time period and a different culture. Okonkwo's father, he visits an oracle, and this is where we learn a lot about how he was that failure. And an oracle, which is kind of like a fortune teller or a soothsayer, he tells him that the reason you're a failure is because of your laziness, and you're never going to become pretty much anything. And so that solidifies for us that he was kind of a loser. And he ends up dying, like I said before, shamed, with no titles. He dies alone, was denied those proper burial rites, sound familiar, like in Antigone, and is not allowed to be born or not allowed to be buried within the earth because it would corrupt it. And he ultimately just kind of rots there in that evil forest. It is the beginning that we see in chapter 3, the beginning of Okonkwo's start of his own farm and the beginnings of his wealth. And just like with the beginning of anything, sometimes it doesn't go very well. And it didn't go very well for him either. That first year was really harsh. The weather did not cooperate, and he barely makes it through. He had asked for seeds from another individual to help him out because what he had wasn't going to be enough. And so he kind of saved a little bit of his own seeds and began to plant, and he lost a lot of the initial crops that he had. But that didn't stop him. And you'll see that some other farmers, like, it was so bad that they lost things, kind of like the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, that some people had committed suicide. Same thing here. One of the farmers, he lost everything, and he ended up killing himself. And so, I mean, it was really bad. And he was able to get through that, and he views that as something that kind of is his push for the rest of his life. And so this incident sets the tone for him wanting to make sure that he survives, that this terrible time is only that more of a proof of his courage and manliness. And it was after this that he always reminds himself of that particular time and is not going to let him stop it. And kind of like many of us, we have been through things and you're like, if I can get through that, I can get through anything. And that's kind of what he thinks of this particular moment in his life. In chapter 4, there is kind of going back to the story of Ikumufina staying with Okonkwo's second wife, which is his other son's mother. And we learn here that he becomes really popular with the children, becoming a lot, very much part of the family. And like I had mentioned before, he even begins to call Okonkwo father. And Okonkwo grows very fond of the boy, but just like someone who is an individual that wants to show manliness, he doesn't feel that he can show that emotion. He never admits it and he never shows it, even though he is proud of Ikumufina and does love him. He thinks that the only emotion that can be shown is anger. That's the only thing that's worth being shown. So that's the only emotion that you will ever see out of him. And so here, during the week of peace, which is a time of absolutely no arguing, no war, no hurting each other, nothing of that nature, is supposed to be really sacred to their tribe. And it's the week before they're really supposed to get going on their planting and their harvest and whatnot. And Okonkwo's wife does something that angers him, and he ends up beating her during this time. And it was because, again, not wanting to change, to say, okay, I'll let it go. I have to, because it's the week of peace. I have to be able to bend and think of what's best for everybody else. It's that manliness that gets in his way. That is, again, one of his flaws in being that tragic hero. And he disappoints the elders who tell him that, you have no respect for the gods or for your ancestors. And as we've seen with Antigone, if you upset or anger those gods, bad things can come back to you. And so if we see that now, This could be an element of foreshadowing that maybe something is going to happen or be bad or come down upon Okonkwo in some way, shape, or form. But he does, in a sense, feel bad that he has upset his elders as well. He is reminded that during this sacred time, they're supposed to have peace no matter what. And he was told that he's committed a huge, great evil, and he could have brought ruin to the clan. And remember, it's the clan or the whole tribe or the whole family that is more important than the individual. And he has a hard time accepting that. And he tries to explain the situation in the story, but the elder will not have it and doesn't want to listen to it. And he says it doesn't matter. No matter what, there's supposed to be peace at this time in order to please the spirits and the gods. So after the week of peace, Ikamufina and Nuai help to prepare for the planting season that is coming up, and you'll see more of them getting along, and you'll begin to see that relationship that the two boys have and how he becomes that role model. He, meaning Okonkwo, criticizes the boys not necessarily because they're doing a bad job, but he criticizes them in hopes that he's pushing them to become great farmers one day like he is. He believes that by pushing them, they're going to rise up to that greatness and achieve what it is that he himself has been achieving all of this time. But it also goes back to him being very demanding on his family and not backing down and kind of giving anybody the slack. He's a tough dude. And so that leaves us chapter 5, and that's going to be the end of this video for the introduction and the summaries of chapters 1 through 4. Please continue to read, continue to look at these notes more than once, and I hope you guys are all doing well. Spread peace, love, and joy.